Have you ever felt like socializing is more exhausting than fulfilling? Like the conversations you're expected to engage in feel repetitive, shallow, even unnecessary? What if everything you've been told about the importance of a rich social life is a carefully crafted illusion? One designed to keep you distracted, conforming, and seeking validation from people who don't even understand you? The world has conditioned you to believe that solitude is a weakness, that being alone is something to be feared, something to escape at all costs. But what if solitude isn't the absence of something, but the presence of something greater? What if the people who spend less time in social settings aren't missing out on anything, but in fact are the ones who see reality for what it truly is? This is what Arthur Schopenhauer knew over 100 years ago, and what most people still refuse to understand today, that the more intelligent you are, the less you need from the world around you, that the highest form of fulfillment does not come from socializing but from thinking, from reflecting, from engaging with ideas so deep that few will ever comprehend them, that the more you develop your mind, the less you rely on others to fill the silence. Because that silence, that solitude, it is not empty, it is not lonely, it is full, it is rich, it is alive with thought, with creativity, with something that most people spend their entire lives running away from: the depth of their own mind. But society does not want you to embrace solitude. It does not want you to realize that the most powerful people in history, the ones who changed the world, who saw beyond the illusions, who created things of true meaning, were never the ones who spent their time in meaningless chatter, in forced interactions, in seeking approval from people who never mattered. They were the ones who walked alone, the ones who chose the path of depth over the illusion of connection, the ones who saw through the facade of social necessity and realized that true fulfillment comes not from the crowd, but from within. Because that is the truth no one tells you, that socializing for the most part is a distraction. It is a way to escape the mind rather than engage with it. It is a way to fill the space with noise rather than meaning. And for those who think deeply, for those whose minds are constantly searching, questioning, creating, the idea of spending hours in meaningless conversation is not just unappealing, it is unbearable. The small talk, the gossip, the trivial back and forth that serves no purpose other than to pass the time, none of it interests the intelligent mind, and it never will. Because the intelligent mind is not searching for validation, it is not searching for approval, it does not need the constant reassurance that it belongs. It does not seek to fit into a society that it knows is built on shallow expectations and unspoken rules that have no real meaning. It sees the game, it understands the script, and it chooses not to play. Not because it is arrogant, not because it is antisocial, but because it knows that its time, its energy, its focus are better spent elsewhere. Schopenhauer knew this, and he did not shy away from it. He did not pretend that social interaction was the key to happiness. In fact, he argued the opposite, that the happiest people, the most fulfilled people, are not those who are constantly surrounded by others, but those who have mastered the ability to be alone, to think, to reflect, to exist without the need for external validation, because the mind that can entertain itself is the mind that is truly free. The person who does not need social distractions to feel complete is the person who is truly independent. And the one who is independent, who is self-sufficient, who does not rely on the world to provide a sense of purpose, is the one who holds the greatest power of all. But that power comes at a cost. Because the world does not celebrate solitude, it does not reward those who choose the path of deep thought over social conformity. It sees those who reject the norm as strange, as outsiders, as people who must be convinced to rejoin the herd. Why don't you come out more? Why don't you talk more? Why don't you engage like everyone else? These are the questions that society asks the intelligent, not because it cares, but because it cannot understand, because it cannot fathom that someone could actually enjoy being alone, that someone could prefer the richness of their own mind over the fleeting pleasures of surface-level connection. And so, those who think deeply, those who crave meaning, those who choose solitude over social games, are often misunderstood. They are labeled as distant, as detached, as cold, but in truth they are simply focused. Their minds are not idle. They are not searching for something outside of themselves to complete them. They are engaged with something deeper, something that most people will never experience. They are living in the world of ideas, of creativity, of introspection. And for them, that world is far more fulfilling than any party, any social event, any forced interaction could ever be. Because the highest form of fulfillment is not found in the presence of others. It is found in the presence of the self. The ability to be alone without feeling lonely. The ability to sit in silence and find it more meaningful than hours of conversation. The ability to walk a path that few will understand, but that leads to something far greater than social acceptance, something real, something profound, something eternal. And yet, the world will try to convince you otherwise. It will try to make you believe that solitude is something to be avoided, something to be fixed, that if you do not crave social interaction, there must be something wrong with you, that if you do not enjoy the things that others enjoy, you must be missing out. But the truth is, the only thing you are missing out on is the illusion that happiness is found in constant connection, the illusion that socializing is necessary for fulfillment, the illusion that being alone is something to be afraid of. But it is not. It never has been. And the moment you realize this, the moment you embrace the truth that solitude is not a weakness but a strength, you begin to see the world differently. You begin to understand why the greatest minds in history chose solitude over social life, why they walked alone, why they spent their time not in endless conversation but in deep thought, why they did not seek approval but instead sought truth. And that is the choice you must make. Will you continue to believe that social life is a necessity, that solitude is something to be avoided, or will you step into the understanding that the more you think, the less you need, that the more you develop your mind, the less you rely on external validation, that the most powerful people, the most creative people, the most intelligent people in history were never the ones who sought the crowd, but the ones who walked away from it? Because the world will tell you that you need to belong, that you need to engage, that you need to be like everyone else, but you don't. You never have, you never will. The only thing you need is the clarity to see through the illusion, the strength to choose solitude over superficiality, and the wisdom to understand that the greatest fulfillment does not come from the world, but from within. Most people are afraid of being alone. They do not know what to do with themselves when the noise fades, when the distractions disappear, when there is no one left to validate their existence. They fill their days with conversation, with entertainment, with anything that keeps them from having to sit with their own thoughts. And yet, despite all of this, they still feel empty. They still feel restless. They still search for something more, something deeper, something real. But what they do not understand is that what they are looking for will never be found in the crowd. It will never be found in social validation. It will never be found in the approval of others. Because what they are looking for has been inside them all along, waiting for them to be still enough, quiet enough, aware enough to finally see it. This is what the great thinkers understood. This is what Schopenhauer saw long before anyone else, that solitude is not a curse, it is a gift. It is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced, because only in solitude can the mind truly expand. Only in solitude can the deepest ideas take form. Only in solitude can a person come to understand who they really are, beyond the expectations of the world, beyond the distractions of society, beyond the illusions that keep most people blind to their own potential. But to embrace solitude, you must first break free from the lie that has been told to you since birth, the lie that happiness comes from others, the lie that to be alone is to be incomplete, the lie that success, fulfillment, purpose can only exist in the presence of a social life. It is this belief that keeps so many trapped, that keeps them chasing approval, that keeps them living in a way that is not true to who they really are. But the intelligent mind sees through this illusion. It recognizes that the endless pursuit of social validation is just another form of control, another way to keep people distracted, disconnected from their own power, their own wisdom, their own inner truth. And that is why those who think deeply often prefer solitude over social life, not because they dislike people, not because they are incapable of socializing, but because they understand that most interactions add nothing of value to their lives. that the majority of conversations are filled with noise, with surface-level exchanges that do not nourish the mind or the soul, that being in a crowd often feels lonelier than being alone. Because true connection is rare, genuine understanding is rare, and when you are someone who sees the world differently, who questions, who thinks deeply, who does not just accept things as they are, you realize that most people are not on the same path. They are not looking for truth. They are not seeking meaning. They are simply following the script that was handed to them, moving through life on autopilot, never stopping to ask why, never questioning if there is more. And that is why intelligent people withdraw. Not because they are antisocial, but because they refuse to waste their time on conversations that do not inspire, on relationships that do not challenge them, on interactions that do not elevate their thinking. They would rather be alone with their thoughts than surrounded by people who do not understand them. They would rather spend their time reading, learning, creating, rather than filling the silence with meaningless chatter. Because the mind that is truly alive does not crave distractions, it craves depth, it craves knowledge, it craves understanding. And these things are not found in the constant noise of social life. They are found in the quiet, in the solitude, in the moments where the mind is free to wander, to explore, to create without interruption. Schopenhauer understood this better than most. He saw that the happiest people were not those who were constantly surrounded by others, but those who had learned to be content within themselves. He believed that the more intelligent a person is, the more they find fulfillment in their own thoughts, rather than in social interactions. That true wisdom comes not from being constantly engaged with the world, but from stepping back, observing, reflecting. And yet society does not teach this. It does not encourage people to embrace solitude. It pushes the idea that being alone is something to be fixed, something to be avoided. It promotes the belief that social success is the key to happiness, that the more friends you have, the more valuable you are, that being constantly connected is the same as being truly fulfilled. But this is a lie. It is a distraction. It is a way to keep people from ever truly knowing themselves. Because to truly know yourself, you must step away from the noise. You must break free from the need for constant interaction. You must be willing to sit in the silence and face what is there. And this is something most people will never do. They will spend their lives running from solitude, filling every moment with something, anything, that keeps them from having to sit with their own thoughts. But those who embrace solitude, those who welcome it, those who understand its power, they see the truth. They see that the greatest discoveries, the deepest insights, the most profound moments of clarity do not come from the outside world. They come from within. This is why the greatest minds in history chose isolation over society. Why the philosophers, the inventors, the visionaries spent more time in solitude than in socializing. Because they understood that the world is filled with distractions. That most people are too busy seeking approval to ever find real meaning. That true genius, true creativity, true understanding can only be found when the mind is free to explore, unrestricted by the expectations of the crowd. But to live this way is to be different. To step away from the norm is to be misunderstood. And that is the price of thinking deeply in a world that does not value depth. That is the cost of seeing beyond the illusion. But it is a price worth paying. Because while others are chasing validation, you will be chasing wisdom. While others are filling their time with meaningless interactions, you will be filling your mind with knowledge. While others are afraid of being alone, you will understand that solitude is not something to escape, but something to embrace. So the question is, do you have the courage to walk that path? Do you have the strength to choose meaning over approval, depth over distraction, solitude over social validation? Because if you do, you will see the world differently. You will understand what few ever do, that the greatest fulfillment does not come from the outside world. It does not come from the number of people who surround you. It does not come from being liked, from being accepted, from being part of the crowd. It comes from within, from knowing yourself, from mastering your own mind, from realizing that you do not need the world's approval to live a life of meaning. And once you realize that, once you stop looking outside of yourself for happiness, you become free. free from the expectations of society, free from the illusion that you need to constantly engage to be fulfilled, free to think, to create, to explore without limits. Because when you no longer need the world's approval, you gain something far greater. You gain yourself. Most people will never understand this. They will never understand why you prefer silence over small talk, why you choose solitude over shallow connections, why you would rather sit with your own thoughts than engage in conversations that drain you. To them, solitude is unnatural. It is something to be avoided, something to be filled with noise, with company, with distractions. But for you, solitude is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the presence of depth, of clarity, of space to think freely without interference. It is the presence of your own mind, unrestricted, uninfluenced, untouched by the expectations of others. And that is why the intelligent often find themselves withdrawing, stepping back from the crowd, choosing their own company over the company of those who do not think as deeply. It is not arrogance. It is not superiority. It is simply the recognition that time is the most valuable resource, and wasting it on conversations that do not inspire, on relationships that do not fulfill, on social obligations that serve no purpose, is a betrayal of the mind's potential. But the world does not reward solitude. It rewards conformity. It praises those who are socially engaged, who are constantly connected, who move with the group, who fit into the expectations that have been placed upon them. It tells you that to be alone is to be missing something, that if you do not crave social interaction, there must be something wrong with you, that to prefer your own mind over the company of others is unnatural. But this is a lie. It is a belief designed to keep you dependent on external validation, to keep you plugged into the system, to keep you from realizing that everything you have been searching for outside of yourself has been within you all along. Schopenhauer saw this long before the modern world made it worse. He knew that the more intelligent a person is, the less they need from others, that the richer their inner world, the less they require from the external. He saw that most people fill their time with socializing not because they truly enjoy it, but because they fear what will happen if they stop. They fear the silence. They fear what they might discover about themselves when there is no one else around to define them. But those who embrace solitude, who welcome it, who understand its power, are free, because they do not need the world to tell them who they are. They already know. And that is the real difference. Those who rely on social life for their happiness are always dependent. Their moods rise and fall based on how others treat them, on the attention they receive, on the validation they are given. But those who find fulfillment within themselves, who do not need external approval to feel complete, are untouchable. They are independent. They are free in a way that most will never understand. Because the truth is, the deeper you think, the more you realize how little the world truly understands. How much of society is built on illusion, on false priorities, on superficial interactions that serve no real purpose. You begin to see through the masks, through the scripted conversations, through the need people have to be seen, to be liked, to be validated. And when you see through it, when you recognize that most of what people chase is empty, you lose interest. Not because you do not care, but because you see no meaning in it. And that is when solitude becomes not just a preference, but a necessity. A place where you can escape the noise, the expectations, the mindless distractions that keep most people asleep. A place where you can think, truly think without interruption, without compromise. A place where your ideas can form without being shaped by the opinions of those who do not see the world as you do. But this path is not for everyone. Most will continue to chase social validation, to fill their time with distractions, to avoid the silence at all costs. Most will never understand why you choose to be alone, why you prefer depth over quantity, why you walk away from the things that others seem to value so highly. They will misunderstand you. They will label you as distant, as disconnected, as strange. But what they fail to see is that you are not missing anything. They are. They are missing the depth, the clarity, the insight that only comes from stepping away from the crowd. They are missing the understanding that happiness is not found in numbers, in followers, in being surrounded by people who do not truly know them. They are missing the realization that solitude is not loneliness, it is freedom. And once you embrace that freedom, once you stop allowing the world to tell you what should make you happy, once you stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself over shallow connection, you become unstoppable. Because you no longer seek permission, you no longer wait for approval, you no longer care if the world understands you because you understand yourself. That is the highest form of intelligence. Not the ability to memorize facts, not the ability to engage in debate, not the ability to prove yourself in conversation, but the ability to be alone and be completely content. The ability to sit in silence and feel at peace. The ability to walk a path that few will ever take, because you know that the greatest minds, the most creative souls, the ones who left the greatest impact, were never the ones who followed the crowd. They were the ones who stepped away from it. So the question is, will you have the courage to do the same? Will you choose depth over distraction? Will you embrace solitude instead of fearing it? Will you trust that the greatest fulfillment does not come from the world, but from within? Because the moment you do, the moment you stop seeking happiness in others and start finding it in yourself, you will never be the same. The world will no longer control you. Society will no longer dictate your worth. You will no longer feel the need to be understood, because you will understand yourself. And that is the ultimate freedom. The kind of freedom that can never be taken from you. The kind of freedom that allows you to live, truly live, without the weight of expectation, without the need for validation, without the endless search for something that was never missing to begin with. So the choice is yours. Do you continue chasing what the world tells you to chase, or do you step away and discover something far greater? Because those who choose solitude, who embrace it, who see it for what it truly is, are not missing out on life. They are experiencing it at its deepest level. And once you see that, once you truly understand it, you will never again feel the need to explain yourself. You will never again wonder if you are doing something wrong by choosing solitude, because you will know with absolute certainty that you have chosen the only path that leads to real freedom, and that is something few will ever have the courage to do. Most people live their entire lives without ever truly knowing themselves. They move from one conversation to the next, one social event to another, constantly surrounded by people, constantly engaged in noise, yet never pausing long enough to ask the one question that truly matters. Who am I when no one else is around? What remains when the voices fade, when the distractions disappear, when there is no one left to impress? Most will never know, because most will never allow themselves to be alone long enough to find out. But the intelligent mind does not run from solitude. It does not fear the silence. It does not need to be constantly engaged in social activity to feel a sense of purpose. Because it understands that true depth is found in stillness, that real growth happens in the moments when the world is quiet, when the mind is free to wander without interference, when thoughts are not shaped by the expectations of others, but by the purest form of inner awareness. And that is why solitude is not just a preference for highly intelligent people, it is a necessity. It is the space where ideas are born, the place where wisdom is cultivated, the environment where the mind is allowed to expand beyond the limitations of everyday conversation, beyond the superficial exchanges that dominate most interactions, beyond the distractions that keep so many from ever reaching their full potential. But society does not teach this. It does not encourage solitude. It does not promote deep thought, self-reflection, or intellectual independence. It tells you that to be alone is to be incomplete, that if you are not constantly surrounded by others, you are missing something essential, that the happiest people are those with the largest social circles, the most connections, the most engagement. And yet, look at the world. Look at how many people who are constantly socializing, constantly interacting, still feel lost, still feel unfulfilled, still feel as though something is missing. Because the truth is, connection does not come from the number of people around you. It does not come from being seen, from being liked, from being included. It comes from understanding yourself, from knowing who you are without the influence of others, from being at peace in your own company, because you do not need anyone else to complete you. This is what Schopenhauer saw. That most people are not seeking conversation, they are seeking distraction. They are not looking for genuine connection, they are looking for an escape from themselves. They do not socialize because they love deep discussions. They socialize because they cannot bear the thought of sitting alone with their own thoughts. And when you understand this, when you truly see it for what it is, you stop feeling the need to conform. You stop feeling like you are missing out when you choose solitude, because you realize that what you have, the ability to be content in your own mind, the ability to think deeply, to reflect, to create, is something rare, something powerful, something that most people will never experience because they are too busy avoiding it. And this is why the intelligent withdraw, not because they dislike people, not because they are incapable of socializing, but because they recognize that their time, their energy, their focus is better spent on things that matter. They would rather read than engage in meaningless conversation. They would rather create than waste time on gossip. They would rather spend an evening in thought, in exploration, in self-discovery, than fill their time with interactions that do not add value to their lives. Because value is what matters, meaning is what matters, depth is what matters, and when you reach a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of awareness, you begin to see how rare these things truly are. You begin to realize that most people do not think as deeply as you do, that most do not question the things you question, that most are content living on the surface, never digging deeper, never looking beyond what they are told, never questioning whether the life they are living is truly their own. And that is why intelligence often leads to isolation. Because when you think deeply, you see things differently. You do not accept what others accept. You do not find fulfillment in what others find fulfilling. You are not entertained by what most people enjoy. And because of this you naturally separate yourself, not because you intend to, but because you no longer find interest in the things that keep most people engaged. But this is not a weakness, it is not a flaw, it is not something that needs to be fixed. It is a sign that you have reached a level of independence that most will never reach, that you have freed yourself from the need for constant validation, that you no longer require the presence of others to feel whole. And once you embrace this, once you stop seeing solitude as something that isolates you and start seeing it as something that elevates you, everything changes. You begin to understand why the greatest minds in history spent most of their time alone, why the philosophers, the inventors, the visionaries, the creators all chose to step away from the crowd, because they knew that genius is not born in the noise, it is born in the silence. That creativity does not come from constant social interaction, it comes from solitude, from the space where the mind is free to explore without limits, without restrictions, without interference. And when you look at your own life, when you look at the times when you have been most creative, most inspired, most clear in your thinking, you will see that those moments did not happen in the middle of a crowded room. They did not happen when you were surrounded by people, engaged in small talk, trying to keep up with the expectations of social life. They happened when you were alone, when your mind was quiet, when the world had faded away and you were left with nothing but your thoughts. Because that is where true brilliance is found, in the stillness, in the solitude, in the moments when you are free to think without interruption, to question without judgment, to create without limitation. And the more you embrace this, the more you prioritize it, the more you will see just how much of life is designed to pull you away from it. Because society does not want you to be independent, it does not want you to think for yourself, it does not want you to step away from the distractions, from the expectations, from the system that keeps most people asleep. It wants you engaged, occupied, dependent on others for your sense of worth. It wants you to believe that solitude is something to be feared, that thinking for yourself is dangerous, that stepping away from the crowd is a mistake. But it is not a mistake. It is the path to freedom. It is the path to understanding. It is the path that leads to something greater than anything the world can offer. Self-mastery, the ability to be completely content within yourself, to find fulfillment not in what others give you, but in what you cultivate within your own mind. And that is the highest form of intelligence. Not just knowledge, not just insight, but the ability to be alone and feel no lack. The The ability to walk your own path, even when no one else understands it. The ability to live in alignment with your own truth, without needing anyone else to validate it. And once you reach that point, once you truly embrace it, you will never again feel the need to explain yourself. You will never again wonder if something is wrong with you for choosing solitude over social life, because you will know with absolute certainty that you have found something far more valuable than approval. You have found yourself. The world has convinced people that solitude is a problem to be solved, that if you spend too much time alone, there must be something missing from your life. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Why is it that someone who enjoys their own company is seen as strange, as incomplete, as in need of fixing? Why is solitude something to be pitied rather than respected? The answer is simple. Because solitude creates independence, and independence makes you untouchable. The moment you stop needing the world to entertain you, to validate you, to give your life meaning, you become something society does not know how to control. You become free. And that is what most people will never understand, that solitude is not loneliness, that being alone does not mean being empty, that choosing to step away from the noise is not an act of isolation but of liberation. Because when you are alone, when the distractions fall away, when you no longer rely on the external world for your sense of self, something incredible happens. You begin to hear yourself. You begin to think clearly, without interference, without the constant opinions of others shaping your perception. You begin to see the world not as it is presented to you, but as it actually is. This is why the greatest minds in history spent most of their time alone, why Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Pascal all understood that solitude is not a state of deprivation but a state of power. They knew that most conversations are distractions, that most interactions are surface level, that most people are too busy trying to fit in to ever think deeply enough to break free. They saw that the crowd does not reward those who think differently. It punishes them. It pressures them to conform, to seek approval, to abandon their own minds in favor of belonging. And that is why intelligence so often leads to solitude. Because when you see through the illusion, when you recognize that most social interactions are a script people follow without question, when you realize that true depth, true meaning, true understanding are not found in the constant engagement with others, but in the quiet space where the mind is free, you naturally begin to withdraw. Not because you dislike people, not because you are antisocial, but because you would rather spend time with thoughts that challenge you than with conversations that bore you. And that is something most people will never understand, because most people do not think this deeply. They do not question the things you question. They do not see the world the way you do. And when you operate on a different level of thought, when your mind is engaged in concepts, ideas, perspectives that go beyond the surface, you begin to realize how rare genuine connection actually is. How difficult it is to find people who think the way you think, who see beyond the trivial, the mundane, the predictable patterns that make up most of human interaction. That is why intelligent people do not crave social life. Not because they think they are better than others, but because they crave something deeper. And when depth is rare, when intelligence is isolating, when the ability to think beyond the norm separates you from the majority, solitude becomes not just a preference, but a necessity. It becomes the only place where your mind can truly exist without limitation, without restriction, without the weight of expectations that demand you be something you are not. But society does not reward this. It does not praise those who choose solitude over social conformity. Instead, it labels them as outcasts, as misfits, as people who need to be brought back into the fold. You need to get out more, they say. You need to be more social, as if socializing is the ultimate measure of a well-lived life, as if time spent alone is time wasted. But this is a lie, a belief designed to keep people dependent, to make them feel as though they are incomplete without the presence of others. But what if the opposite is true? What if solitude is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength? What if being alone is not something to be fixed, but something to be embraced? What if the ability to be content in your own company, to think deeply, to question, to explore, is the highest form of intelligence? Because that is what Schopenhauer believed. that the happiest, the most fulfilled, the most intellectually alive people are not the ones who are constantly surrounded by others, but the ones who have mastered the ability to be alone, the ones who do not need social life to feel complete, the ones who do not rely on external validation to feel whole, the ones who have cultivated an inner world so rich, so vast, so full of thought and depth, that they no longer require the noise of the external world to entertain them. And that is something few will ever experience, because most people are too afraid of silence, too afraid of being alone with their own thoughts, too afraid of what they might discover if they stop running, stop distracting themselves, stop filling every moment with engagement, with entertainment, with validation. But those who embrace solitude, who welcome it, who understand its power, know the truth. They know that solitude is not empty, it is full. It is alive with possibility, with creativity, with the kind of thinking that can only happen when the mind is free from outside influence. They know that true fulfillment does not come from being constantly surrounded by others, but from knowing that they do not need to be, that their happiness, their clarity, their peace is not dependent on anyone else. And once you reach that point, once you stop needing, once you stop seeking, once you stop looking for something outside of yourself to make you feel whole, you realize something that changes everything. You realize that you were never missing anything to begin with. That everything you thought you needed from others, validation, approval, connection, was always within you. That solitude was never about being alone, but about discovering who you truly are when the world is no longer shaping you. And that is the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to exist without dependence, the freedom to think without limitation, the freedom to live without constantly seeking, constantly chasing, constantly trying to fit into a world that was never designed for those who see beyond it. Because thinking deeply will always set you apart. Questioning the norm will always make you different. Seeing through the illusion will always isolate you from those who are still caught in it. But that is not a reason to fear solitude. It is a reason to embrace it. Because the deeper you go, the more you see, and the more you see, the less you need. So do not fear being alone. Do not mistake solitude for loneliness. Do not let the world convince you that you are missing something simply because you do not crave the same things they do. Because what you have, what you see, what you understand, is something most people will never experience, and that is not a loss, it is a gift. The only question is, will you embrace it? Will you allow yourself to step away from the expectations, the distractions, the illusions, and walk the path that so few have the courage to take? Because those who do, those who choose depth over noise, understanding over conformity, solitude over superficiality, are not lost, they are not lacking, they are not missing out, they are free. The world has always belonged to those who think differently, to those who do not follow the crowd, who do not seek approval, who do not shape their lives around what others expect of them. The greatest minds in history, the ones who saw further, who understood more, who changed the way humanity thinks, were never the ones who craved solitude. They were the ones who embraced solitude, who chose depth over distraction, who understood that true wisdom is not found in the endless pursuit of validation, but in the quiet moments where the mind is free to think without limits. But this is not something most people will ever understand, because most people have been conditioned to fear solitude, to see it as something unnatural, something to be avoided at all costs. They have been told that happiness comes from belonging, from being surrounded by others, from always being engaged in conversation, in connection, in activity. And so they fill their lives with interactions that do not nourish them, with relationships that do not challenge them, with conversations that serve no purpose other than to pass the time. They do this not because it fulfills them, but because it keeps them from facing the one thing they have never been taught how to handle, their own mind. But those who embrace solitude, who welcome the stillness, who do not fear their own thoughts, understand something most will never see, that the mind, when left to itself, is not a prison, it is a universe, a place where the deepest truths can be discovered, a place where creativity is born, where ideas take shape, where the understanding of life itself begins to unfold in ways that no conversation, no social interaction, no external validation could ever provide. This is why intelligence and solitude are so often connected, because the mind that is truly alive does not need constant stimulation from the outside world. It does not need the presence of others to feel whole. It does not need to fill the silence with noise just to avoid the discomfort of being alone. It thrives in solitude. It grows in solitude. It reaches levels of depth and clarity that are impossible to achieve when constantly surrounded by distraction. But this path is not for everyone. Because solitude requires a kind of strength that most do not have. It requires the ability to be alone without feeling lonely, the ability to entertain oneself without needing an audience, the ability to think deeply without being afraid of where those thoughts might lead. And for many that is too much to handle. They would rather fill their time with meaningless interaction than face the reality of who they are without it. Schopenhauer understood this. He saw that the majority of people do not seek truth, they seek comfort. They do not want to be challenged, to be confronted with ideas that disrupt their sense of security. They want validation, reassurance, confirmation that their way of thinking is correct. And so they surround themselves with people who think like them, who agree with them, who reinforce the reality they have already accepted. They do not seek knowledge, they seek familiarity. But those who walk the path of solitude are different. They are not looking for comfort, they are looking for truth. They are not interested in being told they are right, they are interested in discovering what is real. They do not surround themselves with people just to avoid being alone. They choose their company carefully, knowing that one meaningful conversation is worth more than 1,000 empty ones. And this is why they do not crave social life in the way that others do. It is not because they are incapable of connection. It is not because they do not understand the value of relationships. It is because they refuse to engage in anything that does not serve a purpose. They do not have time for surface-level conversations, for interactions that drain rather than inspire, for relationships that exist out of convenience rather than true connection. Because when you reach a certain level of intelligence, of awareness, of depth, you begin to see how much of life is wasted on things that do not matter, how much time is spent on conversations that lead nowhere, how much energy is given to relationships that do not add anything of real value, and you begin to make a choice to step away, to reserve your time, your energy, your mind for the things that truly matter. But society does not understand this. It sees those who prefer solitude as broken, as disconnected, as in need of fixing. It assumes that those who do not seek constant social interaction must be unhappy, must be missing something, must be struggling in some way, because it cannot comprehend the idea that someone could be happier alone than they are in a crowd. It cannot accept that solitude is not a sign of emptiness, but of fulfillment, that those who seek less from the world often have more within themselves. And this is where the intelligent find themselves misunderstood, because their happiness does not look like the happiness that society promotes. It is not loud, it is not external, it is not dependent on the number of people around them. It is quiet, it is internal, it is rooted in the peace of knowing that they do not need anything outside of themselves to feel complete. This is the kind of happiness that most will never experience, because they are too busy chasing what they have been told will make them happy, too busy believing that they need more friends, more attention, more validation to feel whole. But those who have embraced solitude know the truth, that happiness is not found in how many people surround you, but in how at peace you are when there is no one else around. And once you understand this, once you stop seeking fulfillment in things that do not matter, once you stop feeling the need to explain why you prefer solitude over social life, you become something rare, something that the world does not know how to categorize. You become someone who is truly independent, someone who is not seeking, not chasing, not needing anything outside of yourself to feel whole. And that is what makes you powerful, because the person who does not need is the person who cannot be controlled. The person who does not seek approval is the person who is truly free. The person who does not fear being alone is the person who has reached a level of self-mastery that most will never even come close to achieving. So if you find yourself drawn to solitude, if you prefer depth over distraction, if you choose quality over quantity in your relationships, do not let the world convince you that you are missing something. You are not. What you have, what you understand, what you have cultivated within yourself is something that most will never experience. And that is not a weakness, that is not something to be ashamed of. That is strength, that is clarity, that is the kind of self-sufficiency that the greatest minds in history have always possessed. So let others chase the illusion, let them fill their time with distractions, let them seek their happiness in the external world. You do not need to. You have already found something deeper, something real, something that cannot be taken away. And that is why you do not care about social life in the way others do, not because you are lacking, not because you are missing out, but because you have seen the truth. And once you see it, once you truly understand it, you can never go back. Because solitude is not loneliness, it is freedom, it is strength, it is the path that only a few will ever take, and the question is, do you have the courage to walk it? Most people will never understand why you choose solitude. They will never understand why you are content in your own company, why you don't seek constant interaction, why you are not chasing the same things they are. To them, social life is everything. It is where they find meaning, where they find distraction, where they feel validated. But you see the world differently. You do not need constant engagement to feel alive. You do not need the presence of others to feel whole, because you have discovered something that few ever will, the power of being alone. And that power is not just in the absence of noise, but in the presence of something greater, in the clarity that comes when you are not constantly being influenced by the world, in the depth that comes when your mind is free to explore without interruption, in the strength that comes when you no longer seek permission to think, to feel, to be exactly as you are. Because that is what solitude truly is. It is not a rejection of the world, it is not isolation, it is not loneliness, it is a return to yourself. A return to your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own energy, without the interference of everything and everyone around you. It is the place where you can think deeply, feel fully, exist without the weight of expectation. And yet, the world tells you that this is wrong, that to be alone is to be incomplete, that if you do not crave social life, something must be missing, that if you prefer your own company over the company of others, you must be lonely. But this is not true. It has never been true. Because loneliness is not the absence of people, it is the absence of connection. And when you are truly connected to yourself, when you have built a life that is rich with meaning, with purpose, with thought, you do not feel that absence. You do not feel that lack, because you are not looking for something outside of yourself to complete you. And that is what they will never understand. Because most people are dependent on the external, dependent on validation, on distraction, on the constant reassurance that they belong. They are uncomfortable in silence. They are restless in solitude. They seek the presence of others not because they genuinely enjoy it, but because they are afraid of what they might find if they are left alone with themselves for too long. But you are not afraid. You do not need the world to tell you who you are. You do not need the noise to feel like you exist. You do not need to fill your time with empty conversations just to avoid the discomfort of being alone, because for you, solitude is not uncomfortable, it is necessary. It is where you think, where you create, where you build ideas and explore possibilities that most people will never even consider. Schopenhauer understood this. He saw that the intelligent mind does not crave constant interaction, that the people who think the deepest, who create the most, who understand the world on a level that others do not, are often the ones who spend the most time alone, not because they do not enjoy people, but because they value their time too much to waste it. They value their thoughts too much to drown them in endless noise. They value their energy too much to give it away freely to those who do not appreciate it. And that is why you do not care about social life in the way others do, because you have seen what is beyond it. You have experienced the depth that comes when you are not constantly seeking approval, when you are not constantly chasing validation, when you are not constantly filling the space with people just to avoid the feeling of being alone. You have found peace in solitude, and that peace is something that no amount of socializing can replace. But the world will continue to misunderstand you. It will continue to question your choices, to try to convince you that you are missing something, to make you believe that you need to change to be more like them, to engage more, to seek more, to want more. But you do not need to, because you are not missing anything. You are not lacking. You are not incomplete. You have simply chosen a different path, a path that leads inward instead of outward, a path that seeks truth instead of distraction, a path that values depth over quantity. And that is what sets you apart, not just your intelligence, not just your ability to think, but your willingness to be different, your willingness to reject the idea that social life is the only path to fulfillment, your willingness to stand alone if it means standing in your truth. Because solitude is not emptiness, it is not isolation, it is not a life of loneliness, it is a life of clarity, a life where your thoughts are your own, where your energy is not drained by constant engagement, where your mind is free to explore without limitation. It is a life where you are in control, not of others, not of the world, but of yourself. And that is the highest form of freedom. So let them misunderstand you. Let them wonder why you are not like them. Let them assume that you must be unhappy, that you must be missing something, that you must be searching for something that you cannot find, because they do not see what you see. They do not understand what you understand. They do not know the peace that comes when you are no longer dependent on anyone else for your happiness. And that is the difference. That is why they seek while you have already found. That is why they chase while you stand still. That is why they fear being alone while you embrace it. Because you know something they do not. That the greatest minds, the deepest thinkers, the ones who have left their mark on the world, were never the ones who needed constant social life to feel alive. They were the ones who could sit in silence, think deeply, explore without limit, and find more meaning in solitude than most will ever find in a lifetime of conversation. And once you realize that, once you stop questioning yourself, once you stop feeling the need to explain why you prefer to be alone, you become unstoppable, because you no longer need the world's approval. You no longer seek validation from those who do not understand you. You no longer feel the pressure to be something you are not. You are free, free from the expectations that have been placed on you since birth, free from the belief that you must always be engaged, always be social, always be surrounded by others to be fulfilled, free from the illusion that happiness is something that must be found outside of yourself. Because you have found it, in the quiet, in the solitude, in the moments where the world fades away and you are left with nothing but your thoughts. And in those moments you are not lost, you are not lonely, you are exactly where you are meant to be. Because solitude is not a weakness. It is not something to escape. It is not something to fix. It is a strength. It is a gift. It is the path to understanding, to creation, to self-mastery. It is the space where true intelligence thrives. And the ones who embrace it, who see it for what it truly is, who walk that path without fear, are not missing out on life. They are experiencing it in a way that most never will. Because solitude is not the absence of something, it is the presence of everything. The world will never fully understand those who choose solitude. It will never embrace the ones who prefer silence over noise, depth over distraction, independence over conformity. Because society is built on the need for connection, on the belief that fulfillment comes from being surrounded, from being accepted, from being seen. But what if that is not the only path? What if the greatest fulfillment does not come from the world outside of you, but from the world within? What if the ones who walk alone are not lost, but have simply found something greater than what society has to offer? This is the truth that most people will never understand, That solitude is not a punishment. It is not something to be fixed, something to be escaped. It is a choice. A powerful, intentional choice to step away from the distractions, to disconnect from the expectations, to free yourself from the weight of external validation. Because the moment you stop seeking approval, the moment you stop trying to fit into a world that does not align with you, is the moment you become truly free. And that kind of freedom is rare. Most people will never experience it. They will spend their entire lives tied to the opinions of others, afraid to stand apart, afraid to embrace the silence, afraid of what they might find if they let go of the need to belong. But the ones who do, the ones who have the courage to walk their own path, to prioritize thought over chatter, to value depth over quantity, discover something that most people will never know. Clarity about who they are, clarity about what truly matters, clarity about what they are willing to spend their time on, what they are willing to invest their energy into, what they are willing to allow into their lives. They no longer feel the need to explain themselves, to justify why they prefer solitude over social life, to convince anyone that they are not missing out. Because they know the truth, they know that they are not missing out on anything. They know that the life they have chosen is not one of emptiness but of abundance, an abundance of thought, of creativity, of self-awareness, of meaning. And that is the greatest advantage of all, because when you do not need the world to make you feel whole, when you do not need constant engagement to feel alive, you become untouchable. You become immune to the pressures that control so many. You become free to move through life on your own terms, to shape your own reality, to exist without the weight of expectation holding you back. That is why the intelligent do not care about social life in the way that others do, not because they dislike people, not because they do not value connection, but because they have found something more valuable: self-sufficiency. They have learned to enjoy their own company, to think without interruption, to create without compromise. They have discovered that solitude is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything they need. And that is the lesson that so few will ever learn, because it is not easy to walk alone. It is not easy to step away from the crowd, to reject the expectations that have been placed on you since birth, to choose a path that is misunderstood by most. It is not easy to embrace a life where the only validation that matters is your own. But for those who do, for those who have the strength to break free, the reward is something greater than anything social life can provide: peace. Peace in knowing that you are not dependent on anyone else for your happiness. Peace in understanding that you do not need the constant noise of others to feel alive. Peace in realizing that everything you have been searching for outside of yourself has been within you all along. And once you know that, once you truly embrace it, you no longer feel the need to seek. You no longer feel the pull of distraction, the pressure to conform, the need to fill your time with people who do not understand you. You simply exist, fully, completely, as you are, and that is enough. That is what the world will never understand. That is why it will continue to question, to push, to convince you that you need to engage, to participate, to seek connection as if your happiness depends on it. But you do not need to listen. You do not need to explain. You do not need to change who you are to fit into a world that does not see what you see. Because you already know that the greatest minds, the deepest thinkers, the ones who have truly understood life, have never been the ones who followed the crowd. They have been the ones who stepped away from it. And now it is your turn. Your turn to decide whether you will continue to let the world dictate what fulfillment looks like, or whether you will choose something different. Whether you will seek meaning in the way that others do, or whether you will create your own definition of it. Whether you will spend your life chasing social validation, or whether you will embrace the simple, undeniable truth that everything you need, everything you have been searching for is already within you. And once you accept that, once you truly understand it, you will never again feel the need to explain yourself. You will never again wonder if you are missing something. You will never again feel the pressure to be someone you are not, because you will know with absolute certainty that you are exactly where you are meant to be. Because solitude is not loneliness. It is not isolation. It is not a life of emptiness. It is a life of clarity, of freedom, of self-awareness. It is the path that leads not away from fulfillment but directly to it. And those who have the courage to walk it are not lost. They are not lacking. They are not missing out. They are free.